A warm good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank to the whole Department of General Medicine for organizing this wonderful conference, and especially to Dr. Vitul Gupta sir and the whole Department of Medicine team. And a warm greeting from the AIIMS Patna. Today, the topic allotted to me is acute kidney injury in the ICU. So we know that AKI is a derangement in the kidney functions which occurs in certain short duration. Its incidence increases in the intensive care unit. So whosoever here is dealing the patient in the ICU, they can see that there are very less number of patients who are not suffered with AKI. So, or there are certain special ICUs in which the AKI is uncommon, like surgical ICUs. In surgical ICUs, if you are treating elective surgeries, there are less chances of AKI. But in medicine ICU, when you go through when you are admitting patient with multiple comorbidities, with multiple infection in mods, so this AKI is a universal problem. So incidence of AKI in intensive care unit increased in the past decade due to standardization in definition, increase in the recognition and accurate measurement of urine output. Overall incidence of AKI in ICU is around 20 to 50%. It depends upon how the ICU we are running. Least in the elective surgical cases and highest in the medical or the patient where we keep our surgical septic patients. So in a study it is found that among the hospitalized patients, in the adult patients, it is 5 in 1 patient is suffering from AKI. And the number increases in the pediatric to 1 into 3. So there is a huge burden. Around 20% of the hospitalized patients are suffering from AKI. Now, how we understand this AKI is important? It is important because we know that it is a part of SOFA score which we do regularly in our ICU care, and Apache scores, and it is a prognosticating marker. It is associated with a higher mortality. Here we can see that as the level of creatinine increases, there is high chances of getting the mortality increases exponentially. So serum creatinine and AKI. There are various bodies which defines AKI in different form, like Reifel criteria, Aitken criteria, that is AKI network, and KDIGO guidelines. That is the standard guideline which we follow. It includes the baseline serum creatinine measurement, which is not possible in all cases. So once the patient admits, there are times that we saw the patient and with creatinine of 2. We don't know that from what time the person is having this creatinine level. Serum creatinine level has non-linear relationship with the GFR and require time to accumulate, contributing to the delay in the diagnosis of important changes in the kidney functions. So how often we should measure it? So once the patient got admitted with their normal renal function or whatever the renal function is, how we should measure it? We should do it twice a day. We should do it 6 hourly. So it is very important. The generation of serum creatinine depends upon the baseline factors, pre-morbid illnesses, drug interactions, and acute illnesses. Creatinine clearance also depends upon the fluid resuscitation, what we do. Now the new term comes, it is called subclinical AKI, where there is an increase in the kidney damage biomarkers. There are a few biomarkers like ANGAL, KIM1 or IL-18, which are increased, but the conventional criteria of AKI is not fulfilled. So those patients are having, we call it as subclinical AKI, and these carry the poor prognostication. We can see the Reifel criteria. The Reifel stands for risk, injury, failure, loss, and end-stage kidney disease. In the risk, there is a 1.5-fold of increase in the serum creatinine, and GFR decreases by 25%, and the urine output is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour for the first 6 hours. In the injury, there is a 2-fold increase in the serum creatinine and GFR decreases more than 50%, and urine output goes down for around 12 hours. The same urine output, 0.5 ml per kg per hour for 12 hours. In the failure stage, there is a 3-fold increase in the serum creatinine or GFR goes down by 75%, or the absolute serum creatinine is more than 4 mg%, or acute rise of more than 0.5 mg%. Or urine output further falls to 0.3 ml per kg per hour for 24 hours, or the patient is having anuria. Loss, there is a complete loss of renal kidney functions for more than 4 weeks, and end-stage kidney disease, if that state remains for 3 months, then we can call it as patient land up into the CKD. KDIGO guidelines, it defines into the stages 1, 2 and 3. Serum in the stage 1, the creatinine is 1.5 to 1.9 times baseline, or the serum creatinine is more than 0.3. And urine output, again the same thing, 0.5 ml per kg per hour for 6 to 12 hours. In stage 2, the creatinine is 2 to 2.9 from baseline, and urine output is 0.5 ml per kg per hour for more than 12 hours. And in stage 3, the creatinine level is more than 3 times from the baseline, or the absolute increase is more than 4 mg%, or the patient needs dialysis. So they become the stage 3. Or in the urine output, if the urine output is less than 0.3 ml per kg per hour for more than 24 hours, or the patient is anuria for more than 12 hours. This is very important. Now KDIGO further subdivided according to the presence or absence of the biomarkers. So each stage is divided into the two, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, depending upon the negative or the positive biomarkers. So what are the risk factors for the AKI? There can be environmental risk factors, patient-related risk factors, or the disease-related risk factors. What are the environmental risk factors? Environmental risk factors are inadequate drinking of the water, insufficient control of infectious diseases, or insufficient healthcare systems. Among the patient-related factors, there are two types: modifiable and non-modifiable. In the modifiable, they are like volume depletion, hypotension, anemia, cytotoxic medicines. All these are modifiable risk factors. We have to look, if somebody is having diarrhea, then we have to supplement with the ORS and the appropriate fluids. Non-modifiable risk factors like age, chronic kidney disease, heart, liver, or gastrointestinal diseases, which leads to the kidney failure, diabetes, and several infections. Rare causes include the myoglobinuria, hemoglobinuria, and urolithiasis. It has been seen that in the higher income country, like in the developed countries, we can see that AKI occur mostly in the in-hospital. The AKI occur in the in-hospital and after some surgeries. And the patient is suffering from the multiple comorbidities. In the developing countries, the scenario is different. In the developing countries, the most common causes of AKI are the infections, and drug toxicity, sepsis, and multiple organ failure. So there is a marked difference between the spectrum of AKI among the higher developed countries and the developing countries. Severe diseases, infections, sepsis, malaria, severe trauma, nephrotoxic drugs, opportunistic infections, cholesterol embolism, and urinary tract obstruction. All these can contribute to the AKI. And newer ones, we can also say that even the COVID-19 is a risk factor for the AKI. In COVID era, we have seen that many patients land up in the AKI due to the COVID only. So pathophysiology, it is, I think we have read many times in our curriculum that it is pre-renal, renal, and the post-renal. In the pre-renal, it is the cardiac dysfunction like myocardial infarction, congestive heart failure, vasodilatation caused by sepsis, cirrhosis or anaphylaxis, hypovolemia like hemorrhage or overdiuresis, vascular resistance like during the surgery or anesthesia. Among the intrinsic causes, glomerular causes are there like glomerulonephritis, vascular causes like vasculitis, renal artery stenosis, renal vein thrombosis, tubular like drug or the toxin-induced ischemia, and interstitial infection, drug-induced or interstitial nephritis. Among the post-renal, there are intrarenal and the extrarenal causes like nephrolithiasis, papillary necrosis, urolithiasis, and prostatic hypertrophy. So this is the, I think we are revising it from the second year MBBS. So what exactly happens when a kidney got insult? It causes inflammation, tubular injury, and the microvascular injury. Inflammation causes the tubular production of the pro-inflammatory factors and leukocyte infiltration. Tubular injury causes the loss of polarity, loss of brush borders, cell death by the apoptosis and necrosis that leads to the tubular obstruction. And microvascular injury leads to the endothelial and the smooth muscle injury, endothelial activation. All these lead to mild injury or the severe injury. If somebody lands with this mild injury, the body tries to adapt for that. adaptive repair occurs, tubular repair occurs. It causes immune response in microvascular repair, and there may be a complete repair after some time. And if the person developed a severe or the sustained injury, there is a maladaptive repair that leads to a tubule that causes the tubular arrest, tubular cell death or senescence, immune response, chronic inflammation with macrophage activation, vascular, it causes sustained microvascular loss and parasite endothelial dissociation. And among the tubules, that further leads to the tubular atrophy and degeneration. And the fibroblast leads to the proliferation of the activation and extracellular matrix deposition, ultimately leading to the renal interstitial fibrosis and CKD. So this is the spectrum. So how can a AKI patient present? Besides low urine output, they can present with peripheral edema, third space effusion, pulmonary congestion, hyperkalemia, metabolic edema like hyperkalemia, hyperphosphatemia, hypo or hypernatremia, metabolic acidosis, hyperchloromic acidosis, like it is a cause of high anion gap metabolic acidosis. Azotemia can lead to fatigue, confusion and tremors, and ARDS. So these can be the clinical presentations. Nephrotoxicity, it is a preventable cause. So we have to discuss about this. The important causes are contrast agents, ACE inhibitors or ARBs. It is said that once we start ACE inhibitor or ARBs, we have to follow the patient for a week, and then we have to get the KFT repeat. If there is a rise of serum creatinine by 30%, then we have to stop it. So whenever you are starting ACE inhibitor or ARBs, this thing has to be followed. People taking NSAIDs or antibiotic like aminoglycosides, vancomycin, colistin or polymyxin, these patients should have repeated KFT with 24 or 72 hours. So this is a progression. AKI leading to the acute kidney disease from 7 days to 30 days, or if it is not improved, they can land up into the CKD. So this is a progression of the disease. So AKD is a link between the AKI and the CKD. AKI that persists beyond 7 days, but less than 90 days is acute kidney disease. Now a word about the organ crosstalk. So somebody is suffering from the cardiac disease and get the AKI. So this becomes the cardiorenal syndrome. Or somebody is having liver cirrhosis or some type of liver pathology that lands on the AKI, that become hepatorenal syndrome. So these are the entities which make the person vulnerable for AKI, and involvement of the kidney diseases per se leads to the poor prognosis. So cardiorenal syndrome, hepatorenal syndrome. AKI is a systemic disorder having effect on the heart, lung and the liver and the brain. It causes immunosuppression. That's why the AKI people more likely to die from the sepsis, bleeding, delirium and the respiratory failure. So what investigation we can do? The easiest one, input-output recording, that can make our diagnosis of AKI and AKI. Urine RM, this urine routine and microscopy, this gives plenty of information. At present I am not going to go into the detail of this. Kidney function test, blood urea nitrogen and creatinine. These are the new biomarkers: cystatin C, proenkephalin, NGAL, product of urine TIMP2 and IGF-BP7, and urine NGAL and cystatin C and KIM1. Let me tell you one thing, that all these markers has been studied in various studies in various AKI, but they have not shown better clinical parameter. They are costly enough and they are not going to give us a better parameter. So how can we prevent it? So everyone is talking about to treat the patient, and yes, we know that prevention is better than cure. So how can we prevent it? So there is a KDIGO bundle that causes that is optimization of the volume status and hemodynamics, avoidance of the nephrotoxic medicines and prevention of hyperglycemia. These three things can prevent an AKI. Contrast agents, pre-procedural avoid of NSAIDs and metformin, avoid to use high osmolar contrast agents. Hydration is important before giving contrast, and low and isoosmolar contrast are preferable. That causes less CIL. Treatment includes diuretics and recombinant alkaline phosphatase. We will shortly we'll see what about the diuretics. Recombinant alkaline phosphatase, it is a ilophotase. It is a molecule which coming up and it shows good result. It act as a basically it act detoxifying. It has a detoxifying effect, and it is shown a survival benefit in the animals. Not this molecule has not been studied in the humans till now. About the renal replacement therapy, there is no advantage of giving the early RRT on survival. Early RRT is not found to be better than the standard RRT. Furosemide stress test. Furosemide stress test is given when we are getting a patient of AKI and we give furosemide stress test. In this, the furosemide is given in the dose of 200 mg and we see the output in next 2 hours. So if there is a more than 200 ml of the output, then it is positive, and it said that these patients are do better in the RRT. So this test is also not found to be no difference in overall outcome. Transition of how can we follow these patients? We have to see that those patients are going into the AKD or the CKD. Role of SGLT2 inhibitors as it is seen in the diabetic kidney disease, it is not still to be studied in the AKI, and mineralocorticoid antagonist. This is one small study is done in our center at AIIMS Patna, in which we study the profile of AKI patient and their outcome with the diuretics. We take the patient who develop AKI in the intensive care unit. We exclude those are from the burn patient, surgical patient, non-CKD patient or CLD patients. We recruited about 77 patients, and at last we found that 5 of them are having CKD, so we excluded from this. So we used diuretic in the 44% patients we use the diuretics, and on others we don't use the diuretics. And we can see that there is no much difference in the use of frequent RRT and need of vasopressor among the two groups. There is no much difference in the length of stay of the two groups, but there is a significant difference between the association between the diuretic use and the outcome of the patient. It is seen that those patients who are in which the diuretic was used, they have higher mortality than those in which the diuretics are not used. So diuretics are not beneficial, and in fact it can harm, it can give the poor result. So diuretics are used in the various trials but fail to prove benefit except in the few patients who are at the risk of CIN, where furosemide improve outcome in patients with proper hydration, and it is seen that it causes more harm. One word about the N-acetylcysteine. It is an antioxidant. It is usually given in the cases of contrast-induced nephropathy to prevent contrast-induced nephropathy. This regenerates glutathione and primarily used in the paracetamol poisoning. Preferred in the prevention of AKI in contrast-induced nephropathy, and it is recommended to the at-risk patients. Those patients who are at risk, like those patients who are having diabetes or who are having albuminuria, and they are underwent the contrast studies. In that case, patients we can give it to prevent it. Dopamine. Low dose dopamine remains the favorite for intensively for long. So till recently, dopamine is one of the favorite things. Low dose dopamine we can give it to increase the output as it causes the renal vasodilation. It is true, it is still going on in many ICUs, but ultimately all the studies have shown that even when we increase the dose of the dopamine, it is an algomogenic molecule, and in the ICU patients, as there is already compromise of the renal function, it can deteriorate the condition of the patient. So it is not preferable, it is not at all recommended, but it can be utilized in selective cases depending upon the scenario. So by this, what are our take home messages? AKI is a preventable thing. We should take a step to prevent it. Diuretics are not of any use. So by seeing that the patient urine output is not coming, just give Lasix or give some kind of diuretic. It is not going to improve it. So please do not use unnecessarily. We should focus on the primary thing. No role of early RRT. we should use it judiciously whenever there is a clinical indication or biochemical indication of RRT, then only we should use it. Drug-induced or contrast-induced nephropathy can be preventable, so we should try hard to prevent it. So this is all about from AIIMS Patna. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to have upon the stage Dr. Anuj Bansal, medical oncologist at Punjab Cancer Care and Multi-Speciality Hospital, Bathinda, for his talk on the topic recent advances in lung cancer stage 4 evaluation and management.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Vitul and his team for inviting me here. I'm a medical oncologist working here since last 11 years, and the topic given to me is recent advances in lung cancer, stage 4, evaluation and management. So, objective of my presentation will be to provide a general overview of lung cancer, to discuss type and classification of lung cancer, to provide causes and risk factors, to present signs and symptoms at presentation at early stage of disease as well as at last stage of disease, to explore assessment and diagnostic information of this disease, and to introduce diagnostic staging, and to discuss treatment and side effects related to this disease. So by definition, lung cancer is a malignant lung tumor characterized by uncontrolled cell growth in tissue of the lung. If left untreated, this growth can spread beyond the lung by the process of metastasis into the nearby tissue as well as in the body. Lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death in the United States. In 2023, an estimated 240,000 new cases, among that 120,000 male and 120,000 females of lung and bronchial cancers will be diagnosed this year. And out of that, around 130, that is 130,000, 67,000 male and 60,000 female are estimated to die because of this disease. Only 23% of patients of lung cancer are alive at 5 years or more after the diagnosis, and this includes both non-small cell as well as small cell lung cancer. The results are better in non-small cell, that is adenocarcinoma. The 5-year survival for these patients is around 30%. And since 2006, it is seen that incidence of lung cancer is decreasing in males by 2.6% and in females by 1.1%. So type of lung cancer. Lung cancer can be either a small cell lung cancer or non-small cell lung cancer. In non-small cell, we have either an adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma or large cell carcinoma. Non-small cell lung cancer is much more common than small cell, and that constitute around 80% of lung cancers. And small cell constitute around 15% and others around 5%, that include carcinoids. In non-small cell, around 40% is adenocarcinoma, that is the most common type of lung cancer we see in our practice, followed by squamous cell carcinoma, that is 25%, and then large cell. Adenocarcinoma is mainly located in the peripheral location, while squamous cell carcinoma is located either in the central or as a Pancoast tumor. The main etiology of lung cancer is smoking or chewing tobacco. Approximately 350 people die every day because of lung cancer in the United States, and most of these are because of smoking cigarette. Cigarette smoking contains many carcinogens like polyacrylic aromatic hydrocarbons and nitrosamine aromatic amines. The risk of lung cancer increases with number of packs of cigarette smoked per day and the number of years person has smoked. That is pack year of smoking. The individual who do not smoke also have increased risk if the person is living with a person who smoke. That is passive smoking or secondary smoking. Other possible risk factors is lung disease, family history of lung cancer or any other malignancy. International Agency of Research on Cancer listed several other agents as well. That is arsenic, asbestos, beryllium. We need to get a EGFR testing and ELK testing. Another test also recommended, that is KRAS, ROS, BRAF, MET gene and HER2 gene expression and PDL1 expression. So all adenocarcinomas of lung, these biomarkers need to be tested. For squamous cell carcinoma, again all these markers need to be tested, but their use is limited in squamous cell carcinoma. But for adenocarcinoma, EGFR and ELK is must. So getting biopsy or histopathology is very difficult in lung cancer because the taking tissue is very difficult. If it is a centrally located, we need to have a bronchoscopy guided biopsy. If it is peripherally located, we need to have a CT guided biopsy. So methods to get a tissue for lung cancer, either it will be bronchoscopy guided or EBUS guided, midstenooscopy guided, CT guided, transthoracic needle aspiration. These are the results with the various modalities. Bronchoscopy guided biopsy, the results are very good. Diagnostic yield is 70 to 90%. Other modalities like CT guided, the again results are very good. Other modalities at present we don't have here. So most of the patients at our center, they are getting biopsy either a bronchoscopy guided or a CT guided. So 5 years back, EGFR and ELK test results are coming around 15 to 20 days. Time taken for these tests were around 15 to 20 days. But now we are getting the results within 3 to 5 days because it's better to start treatment after getting these results. But still challenges are there. The main challenge is the tissue sample is very less. So initially we need to get a histopathology. Over that we need to get a IHC done and followed by these biomarkers. So for getting biomarkers, sometimes we don't have tissue. And even now at present, there is uncertainty about ELK testing. It will be done by IHC or a FISH test. So these are the biomarkers which are routinely studied in lung cancer patients. Mutations are seen either with EGFR, KRAS, HER2, MET gene. Amplifications were seen with FGFR, MET or HER2 gene. And gene rearrangements are seen with ELK, ROS and TRG type of genes. So if we are getting EGFR mutation, EGFR mutation is mainly seen in non-smokers, females and Asian origin. Around 30 to 40% of these cases are EGFR positive. And if the patient of lung cancer, adenocarcinoma, EGFR positive, chemotherapy is at second. First is targeted therapy. Among these targeted therapy, the first one is osimertinib. Other recommended therapies are afatinib, geftinib, dacomitinib. All these are available in India, and the results are much better than chemotherapy. With the chemotherapy, the survival is around 10 to 12 months, and with these targeted therapy, the result is up to 3.5 years. So patients who are EGFR mutated, the most important is to get them treated by targeted therapy. The second mutation which is commonly seen is ALK mutation. Again we have targeted therapy for these patients, that is alectinib, brigatinib, lorlatinib. Alectinib, brigatinib is available in India and lorlatinib is also available. And the results, if these targets are patients are treated with targeted therapy, the results are very good. If these mutations are negative, then we test for PD-L1. If the patients have PD-L1 positivity more than 50%, those patients prefer treatment modality is immunotherapy. And if the PD-L1 is less than 1%, then the preferred modality for these patients is chemotherapy. So these are the various mutations which are seen in lung cancer patients and their respective medicines available in the market. So patients with PD-L1 expression more than 50%, preferred is single agent immunotherapy or immunotherapy combined with chemotherapy. For adenocarcinoma, preferred chemotherapy is pemetrexed with cisplatin, and for squamous cell carcinoma, preferred chemotherapy is gemcitabine with carboplatin or paclitaxel with carboplatin along with immunotherapy or single agent immunotherapy. So patients with PD-L1 expression between 1 to 49%, these patients are treated with combination of chemotherapy and immunotherapy. The results are best when you give chemotherapy along with immunotherapy in these patients. So these are the chemotherapy agents and immunotherapy agents which are used in non-small cell lung cancer. Either pembrolizumab, nivolumab, atezolizumab, chemotherapy pemetrexed, cisplatin, gemcitabine, cisplatin, paclitaxel, carboplatin with VEGF inhibitors like bevacizumab. There is a role of maintenance therapy in lung cancer. Maintenance therapy is therapy when we give patient is not non-progressive. After treatment, patient is non-progressive. If the patient has PD-L1 expression more than 50%, then single agent immunotherapy can be given for 2 years. And if the PD-L1 expression is less than 1%, then these patients are treated with either pemetrexed maintenance or the agent used initially as a chemotherapy for 2 years. Now few slides for lung cancer screening. The feasibility of lung cancer screening was assessed because localized cancer can be managed with curative intent, and because the mortality in other solid tumors like cervix and breast and colon has decreased after starting screening program for these cancers. National Lung Cancer Screening Trial, they conducted a phase 3 trial in assessing the risk and benefit of low dose CT scan in patients with smoking history. More than 53,000 patients were assessed for this study. This study showed that screening individuals with high risk factors using low dose CT scan decreases mortality by 20%. Individuals who currently or previously smoked cigarette were categorized as high risk lung cancer if they had 30 or more pack year of smoking. Another phase 3 trial that randomized low dose CT scan, around 16,000 persons were enrolled in this study based on age and smoking. 85% in this study were male and 78 individuals were aged between 50 and 74 years. 78% individuals were between 50 and 74 years. At 10 years of follow-up in this study, it was seen that mortality in men was decreased by 24%. So various agencies like NCC and US Preventive Service Task Force, they recommend low dose CT scan in persons who are heavy smokers. Low dose CT scan screening and follow-up are not substitute for smoking cessation program. Just a brief slide. We have started study at our center for lung cancer, adenocarcinoma patients who are EGFR ALK negative. The study is on immunotherapy, that is oral form of immunotherapy. The molecule is CA-170, and this is for stage 4 patients, adenocarcinoma, EGFR ALK negative. Either they will get chemotherapy or chemotherapy along with immunotherapy. Thank you. Any questions, please? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. For the next talk, I would like to have upon the stage Dr. Vikas Chhabra, a surgeon at Chhabra Hospital and president of IMA Bathinda, for his talk on the topic varicose veins, present scenario.
Thank you, audience. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Vitul and Dr.